Bonsoir à tous. Merci beaucoup d'être présents ce soir et surtout merci au Centre culturel suisse pour leur invitation. L'année dernière, le musée de l'Élysée était également présent pour le lancement de son magazine Else. Et le lendemain, le Photomuseum de Winterthur organisait une soirée. Et c'est vrai que cette année, on avait envie de collaborer avec la Fotostiftung et le musée de l'Élysée pour vous faire une soirée en commun et fédérer la Suisse allemande et la Suisse romande. La soirée va se dérouler en deux parties. Elle va durer 1 heure, 30 minutes de présentation du projet étrangement familier et 30 minutes de débat ouvert au public avec des questions pour vous tous. Alors je souhaite la bienvenue à Peter Pfunder, directeur de la Fotostiftung de Winterthur, Alinka Echeverria, une des 5 photographes présentes dans l'exposition étrangement familier, Lars Willumait, commissaire d'exposition indépendant avec lequel nous avons réalisé cette exposition, puisque nous sommes 3 commissaires pour cette exposition, Peter, Lars et moi-même, et Simon Roberts, photographe britannique également présent dans cette exposition. Donc le projet étrangement familier est né il y a 2 années maintenant. C'est le résultat d'un travail collaboratif entre, comme je l'ai dit, entre la Fotostiftung et le musée de l'Élysée. Un projet sur lequel nous avons beaucoup travaillé et nous avons souhaité présenter un nouveau regard sur la Suisse, un regard que le public connaît peu. Et dans le cadre de ce projet, nous avons souhaité inviter 5 photographes étrangers pour donner un nouveau regard sur la Suisse. Et ces 5 photographes ont fait l'objet d'un choix très long, puisque avec Peter, Lars et moi-même, nous avions commencé par choisir des listes et des listes très importantes de photographes pour aboutir à 5 photographes étrangers, donc un photographe britannique qui est Simon, une photographe mexicaine, Alinka Echeverria, un photographe chinois, Zhang Shao, une photographe allemande, Eva Leithoff, et un photographe américain, Shane Lavalette. Et il est très important pour nos 2 institutions d'aider la photographie, d'aider les photographes, notamment les photographes en milieu de carrière, à produire de nouveaux travaux. Et cette exposition est vraiment le résultat d'une commande artistique et surtout d'une véritable carte blanche à ces 5 photographes qui ont eu une liberté totale pour réaliser un projet totalement inédit. Et ce projet a fait l'objet de plusieurs visites. Ces 5 photographes sont venus pendant plusieurs semaines, jusqu'à plusieurs mois, dans le cadre de 2 ou 3 séjours en Suisse. Et ils ont vraiment eu une carte blanche totale pour réaliser ces projets inédits sur lesquels ils ont travaillé. Donc l'exposition a d'abord été présentée au mois de février à la Fotostiftung de Winterthur et est actuellement présentée jusqu'au 7 janvier à Lausanne au musée de l'Élysée. Et l'exposition a fait également l'objet d'une publication que vous voyez devant vous, un coffret qui regroupe les travaux de ces 5 photographes. Un coffret où, pareil, l'idée c'était vraiment de leur donner carte blanche et les 5 ouvrages sont des véritables livres d'artistes qui représentent à la fois leurs travaux, mais vraiment une véritable diversité du médium photographique, puisque, comme vous allez pouvoir le découvrir dans un instant, ces 5 travaux sont extrêmement riches et complexes et vraiment représentent la diversité du médium photographique. Voilà en quelques mots d'introduction. Ici, vous voyez le travail de Zhang Shao, photographe chinois qui est normalement ce soir parmi nous, et c'était la première fois qu'il photographiait en dehors de Chine. Et comme vous allez pouvoir le voir ou non, en achetant le livre à 50 francs, 50 €, 40 € à la librairie. Voilà, je passe maintenant la parole à Peter, qui va en quelques mots vous présenter l'importance et comment la photographie, depuis les origines au milieu du 19e siècle, a toujours contribué au développement du tourisme et notamment au développement du tourisme de masse en Suisse.
Merci Tatiana. Je vais essayer de continuer en français. Après, plus tard, on change en anglais pour que tous les photographes puissent participer. Le début de ce projet est lié au 100e anniversaire de Swiss Tourisme. L'organisation Swiss Tourisme, c'est une organisation fédérale qui est responsable pour la promotion du tourisme en Suisse. Et ils nous sont approchés pour demander est-ce que vous pouvez faire un projet photographique pour cet anniversaire. Au début, on était un peu, on a hésité de réaliser ce projet parce que c'est un propos assez délicat. Si une organisation de promotion approche une institution culturelle qui a une mission totalement différente, mais en même temps, on s'est rendu compte que le tourisme a joué un rôle très très important dans l'histoire de la photographie, même dans nos collections, j'assume aussi dans les collections du musée de l'Élysée. Il y a beaucoup de photos qui proviennent du contexte de voyage, contexte touristique, et même si ce ne sont pas des photos de promotion, c'est lié, cette idée de voyager dans un pays et faire connaître ce qu'on a vu, c'est toujours aussi il y a toujours ces aspects de promotion derrière ou des aspects qui peuvent être utilisés, instrumentalisés par des organisations qui font de la publicité et de la promotion. Alors on a dit oui, on veut essayer, mais on veut essayer de faire quelque chose de différent. Et on a tout de suite décidé que les participants de ce projet, ils doivent être des étrangers, pas des photographes suisses, parce qu'on avait un peu peur de se répéter, de faire la même chose qui était déjà présent dans l'histoire. Si on regarde un peu dans cette histoire les types d'images qui existent, il y a bien sûr les images qui datent du 19e siècle, début du 20e siècle, qui sont vraiment des images, des paysages surtout, des images pittoresques qui idéalisent ce pays aussi pour la promotion, bien sûr. Ces images sont souvent des images pour être collectionnées. Il y a des albums, il y a un marché pour ça. Alors c'est une commercialisation de la photo et en même temps du pays, du paysage. Plus tard, il y a aussi un aspect politique qui entre dans ce discours, c'est-à-dire il n'y a pas seulement l'essai de dire quelque chose sur le pays, le paysage, mais il y a aussi une instrumentalisation de la part des partis politiques. Il y a un exemple intéressant, c'est le travail de Theo Frey qui s'appelle 12 villages. Theo Frey, il était un photoreporter des années 30 et il a fait ce travail pour l'exposition nationale en 1939. Alors on voit déjà, c'est pas seulement une documentation du pays, mais c'est aussi une idée, une mission de dire, ok, c'est un pays qui est divisé dans plusieurs cultures, mais on doit montrer que c'est une unité. Il y a cet aspect aussi de promotion derrière, même si les images sont semblent très documentaires. Mais on va parler de ça plus tard. C'est la question, qu'est-ce que c'est une documentation, qu'est-ce que c'est la photographie documentaire, ou est-ce que ça devient aussi une question d'idéalisation, de promotion. Alors, on a déjà vu, je crois, quelques images de Theo Frey maintenant. Et pour se distinguer de cette histoire un peu lourde et compliquée de photographie d'un côté et tourisme de l'autre côté, on voulait invité les photographes de l'extérieur, on a pris trois décisions. D'abord, comme j'ai dit, photographes étrangers, mais aussi des photographes qui ont déjà de l'expérience avec cette question d'identité, qui ont déjà publié des livres ou qui ont fait des projets qui ont des réflexions sur cette question très compliquée. Qu'est-ce que la photographie peut apporter à une identité nationale, par exemple? Et je crois dans tous les pays, il y a cette tendance de manipuler un peu la photographie, de dire, OK, on fait un projet sur tel pays ou un autre pays, et ça devient toujours un projet assez délicat parce qu'on veut dire une vérité sur un pays, une vérité qui n'existe pas comme ça. Alors la troisième décision qu'on a prise, c'est de dire on veut pas seulement une vision photographique, on veut mélanger des différentes visions photographiques, on veut avoir le dialogue entre différentes cultures, entre différentes approches visuelles, et c'est pour ça qu'on a combiné les choses aussi pour exprimer notre attitude d'une identité multiple, si on peut dire ça, c'est-à-dire il n'y a pas seulement une vérité, une seule vérité sur la Suisse, il y a plusieurs vérités qu'on doit montrer ensemble, et comme ça on ouvre un peu les perspectives. C'était une aventure pour les curateurs, pour les commissaires, pour les institutions, mais aussi pour les photographes. Quand on a commencé, on ne savait vraiment pas où on arrive. On a eu beaucoup de discussions aussi avec Swiss Tourism, qui voulait bien sûr contrôler un peu les pistes. Mais à la fin, on est arrivé de donner une sorte de carte blanche aux photographes, même avec le risque de répéter même quelque chose. On ne voulait pas influencer les projets, c'est-à-dire c'était aussi une recherche où on ne savait pas où on arrive à la fin. Voilà, je crois que c'est un peu le tour d'horizon pour donner le contexte.
Peut-être ce qui est important juste de préciser, c'est que nous avons choisi ces 5 photographes aussi en fonction de leur connaissance ou non de la Suisse. Certains photographes connaissaient très bien le pays, y enseignent, d'autres y venaient pour la première fois. Et effectivement, c'est aussi cette diversité de points de vue et de regards qui nous a particulièrement intéressés.
Okay. So I'm going to jump a little bit in the presentation to present very briefly the project by Eva Leitholf, who can't be here with us tonight. Eva Leitholf is an artist working with photography. She works on long-term projects, and for this project especially, she chose the outer perimeter of Switzerland, the outer borders of Switzerland, bordering on the multiple countries that there are. She took her camper van and traveled for a couple of weeks with her family along those outer borders, and created a very kind of strict visual concept, which the rule was it always had to be the same horizon line that you can see here. And the images were presented, as you can see, as combinations on screens. So it was a combination of 5 different screens. And it showed a moving slideshow that takes about 12 minutes altogether. And it's a mix of image and text combinations. And in the installation view, you also see that Eva always works with image-text combinations, also in a spatial sense. So here you see the opposition of image and then the research-based text that she created for each topic. This is an installation view from Winterthur. Of course, one also has to say it's very different spatial conditions in Winterthur and in Lausanne. So we had to adapt each presentation for the two venues. And here you see visitors on the opening night in Eva Leitholf's presentation. Next photographer, Zhang Zhao from China. Zhao had never worked outside of China before. He had traveled outside of China but never produced work outside of China. Zhao basically took his work for Coastline, for his previous long-term project where he traveled along the coastline of China. He quickly had this notion that he wanted to follow another waterway, which was the River Rhine. And he went from Source to Basel, where the Rhine leaves Switzerland. And he took public transport, bicycle, walking as his method to create his work. He didn't want specifically to have a translator or somebody to help him, an assistant. He wanted to be on his own and be in this kind of also language-wise in this isolation to create his body of work. And this is what you see here.
Il faut préciser qu'effectivement, il ne parle pas anglais et ni français. C'était un vrai, ni allemand, ni italien. Donc c'était un vrai challenge pour lui de voyager en Suisse sans traducteur.
Mm-hmm. And so here you see the installation view from Winterthur and here from Lausanne. What you also see are these little video screens where we incorporated the WeChat videos that he was sending back and forth between him and his community in China. As you might know, WeChat is one of the biggest social media platforms worldwide. And so this was an interesting second layer, yet again, which is also something that I think we can see in all the presentations actually in this project. We showed the work of Shane Lavalette already, presented it. This is one image taken from it. Shane's project was called, in the end, Still Noon. It was loosely based on Theo Fry's work, but it wasn't supposed to be like an update of Theo Fry's project. It was, he took it as a basic inspiration and he created a road trip, an itinerary for a road trip that touched on all those 12 villages, but he took it very loosely and photographed in a way that he wanted to photograph and see Switzerland, and this is the result of that. So now we come to the individual presentations of Alinka and Simon. They will introduce their own work in their own words. So welcome both, and we start with Alinka. Thank you.
Thank you, bonsoir. Après, pour les questions, on peut parler en français. Pour la présentation, je vais le faire en anglais. So my project is called La Neige en été, Snow in Summer, and it's about youth culture in Switzerland. And the reason I chose this is because I think that we know very little about Swiss youth, and I'd photographed youth culture, well, teenagers in New York before and in Cuba, and I find this period of adolescence so interesting to watch and so interesting to photograph. It's a period that we can all relate to, we can all remember, where hormones are literally rushing through the body and so many changes are taking place and we're creating our own identity in so many ways. So I thought this was an interesting time period in people's lives to also question this concept of nationhood, which I believe is a construction. So I photographed 122 teenagers and I met them over a 6-week period in many different circumstances. So some of them are I was going to talk about the first one. So some of them I met through...
I can go back.
Oh, great.
Yep.
Some of them, like Severin here, I met him through a contact I had in Zurich. And some people I met really randomly on the street. For example, the next image of the girl. Oh yeah, so this girl, I actually stayed in her house for a long period of time and really got to know her. And we went together to the place where she wanted her photograph to be made. So it was quite collaborative in that sense. Other people I met, just an encounter. So every photograph is a result of an encounter. And the idea is that through individuals, we can see a collective identity of a generation. This one, for example, was just one moment on a bus, and this, for me, it was so much about technology and disappearing into your iPhone. So she was really just a fleeting moment on a bus. Another aspect of my interest is territory. So I made an effort to go to the border of Switzerland, in particular La Chaux-de-Fonds. This is a tiny, well, it's a town right on the border in the French part of Switzerland, and there I found such an interesting youth culture, which was, I don't want to say forgotten, but it's certainly unseen or maybe not as acknowledged. So both these images are from La Chaux-de-Fonds. And the title of the work comes from an encounter I had with the youngest participants. So the participants range from 13 to 23 or 24. In 2016, this girl, Neige, was 13. And I'd already been to the highest glacier in Switzerland, where I found the entire world's young ski teams practicing during the summer, because it's the only place they can ski in the summer. So I thought how, I was thinking about the things that only Switzerland has. And when I met Neige and made this photograph, I said to her, la neige en été. And to me, it was very fitting, both to speak about the contradictions in Switzerland, and also how the individual can take you through the whole project. So these two photographs are Neige, and I think they're really interesting because in one she's very childlike, and in this one she's becoming a woman. During my wandering, I stumbled upon an antique bookshop, and I went in and found these maps, 20th and 19th century maps. And I really wanted to integrate them somehow. When Swiss youth talk about themselves and how they've grown up, they invariably talk about their canton, maybe less about the city they're from, as maybe we would in Mexico or in England, more about their canton. So the canton is so important because every canton in Switzerland has different identity in every way, different legalities. So I wanted to really integrate these maps, and I started to think about how cartography is very specific to Switzerland for many reasons, but also how cartography is an activity, a constant activity. Mapping is a constant activity that has to be constantly updated. And I really liked the juxtaposition of maps with photography to talk about how photography is also an activity that has to be constantly updated. So I'm using photography to portray young people in our contemporaneity, but in 50 years, they too will be artifacts of the future. So I thought this idea of juxtaposing was very important, also to reference the geographical, historical, and imaginary territory that creates nationhood. And I wanted to really integrate them in with the images. And I'd had this idea, well, I'm very influenced by my Mexican heritage. And this is an image of Mayan códices, which are the stories of Mayan culture, the mythology of Mayan culture. And I thought it was a really poetic way to bring in this idea of the mythology of photography and the mythology of nationhood, and also to really create a direct encounter with the maps and the photographs themselves. So in my proposal, I simply integrated in an accordion structure that you view from on top, the photograph with the maps. And it's not supposed to be a didactic reference to where that person's from, but more this kind of ebb and flow, also referencing Switzerland's mountains, Switzerland's rivers, and to really bring in this idea of how something that had a function like a map can be rendered useless by time, but becomes something else, so it becomes an artifact. And I have to say, in Switzerland, people are admiring the maps just as much as the images. So this is a bird's eye view, and it's just supposed to give you an idea of how it's not a linear narrative. That's very important here. It's this circle, like the island that is Switzerland. So you walk around, there's no beginning and no end, and you view it from your point of view. So it's also a commentary on how we view photography. The last part of the project is it's called Looking Glass. So what I wanted to do is also interrogate my medium and my practice, and question my portrayal of the people I met. And I did this by asking, how do they portray themselves? And they portray themselves through selfies on an app that in 2016 was the app of the moment. Perhaps it won't be in a few years, but this app is very particular because the images that you make on them have a lot of humor, have a lot of intimacy, but they also disappear within 24 hours. And what I found, what I learned through the young people that I met, is that the people that use them use it a lot. And it's not this idea of social media being public and being global. In this case, wasn't so much the case. Actually, they sent it to their intimate circle, so most of them only had like 30 people. So I was really interested in this like window into their intimacy, the intimacy of their identity. And it was really interesting for me because whereas I have maybe photographic or anthropological references of how I make images, like August Sander, for example, is a big reference for me. They model their personal identity on internet celebrity. And I found that really interesting and something that I wouldn't be able to mimic. So my idea was to crystallize this moment, and this moment that would disappear in 24 hours. And I did that by printing them directly onto glass. And the glass also references the history of photography, daguerreotypes, this idea of the mirror with a memory of the daguerreotypes, and also glass plate negatives that are now also artifacts. And yeah, these are the installations of the Snapchat, and I think that's it. Mais si vous avez des questions, je peux comprendre le français et parler en français pour après. Merci beaucoup.
Yeah. We can have a question round later. So thank you, Alinka. Simon, if you want to present your work, I will start your presentation.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So I suppose we'll stick with mapping. A nice link from Alinka, and I actually studied human geography before I went into photography. So I'm very interested in maps. I'm also interested in the way, particularly interested in cultural geography and the way that landscape is a cultural construction, and how that says. How we can kind of interrogate that to get a sense of identity, not just necessarily national identity, but also kind of something more localized. I'm also very interested in the fact that Swiss tourism were the basis of this, to some extent, of the funding of this project. And so I wanted to somehow also interrogate Swiss tourism and actually look at what Swiss tourism do and how they promote Switzerland. So initially, we actually had to put in 2 proposals to Lars and Peter and Tatiana, and from those 2 proposals, they selected one. So I'm going to show you, I kind of integrated my 2 proposals, but the first one, and the one that I went with, was the idea of actually looking at the role of photography, which is so important in terms of the way that Swiss tourism promotes Switzerland. What you're looking at here is actually a map of Switzerland created using a software called SitesMap. So it's a website where you can look at maps of the world based on photographs uploaded to the internet. So this is actually showing you the hotspots of the most uploaded photographs from each of these from Switzerland. So where you're looking at yellow is the kind of hot point where there's the most photographs. Now these photographs are extracted either via hashtags or via geotags. So what this software is doing is trawling the internet looking for any photograph, for example, from Zermatt, and then it will log it on this map. So what I decided to do was look at the 25 most uploaded photographic places in Switzerland and then go and photograph them myself. So by using this map, I was able to identify each of those locations. One of the things I was particularly interested in was also the role of the British in Switzerland and Swiss tourism, because Thomas Cook, the British entrepreneur, basically was one of the first to kind of create the idea of mass tourism, and the idea of the Grand Tour was something very popular amongst the landed gentry and the kind of upper middle class of in Britain in the 1850s and 1860s. And I discovered this journal when I was researching the project, which was the journal was actually published in 1967. What happened was a family were looking through their route in their what do you call it? Attic. Looking at all and they found this journal which had been unpublished, and it was a record of Miss Jemima, who had made a trip to Switzerland in 1863, and she was one of the first tourists to travel with Thomas Cook to Switzerland, and she recorded in quite flowery and elaborate language her journey through Switzerland, which took them a good couple of months. And then this book was published posthumously, but written in 1863. So initially the idea was to follow her footsteps, but I kind of found that was maybe a bit too hackneyed and a bit too kind of easy. So what I decided to do was actually think more about the role of photography now, and actually and integrate Miss Jemima's text and the way that she talked about Switzerland within a more contemporary setting. Now, of course, this is one of the early tourist photographs. This is a photochrome, which was a Swiss-developed system of photography. These are the kind of early kind of photographs that were collected by tourists of the sites that they visited in the late 1800s. If we go to the next slide. So then what I did was I actually started looking specifically at the way that Swiss tourism over the last 25 years have marketed Switzerland. And what's particularly interesting is, well, of course, the USP of Switzerland for Swiss tourism is the landscape. They're selling you an experience of looking, and their experience of looking is described in such a way as this, which is taken from one of their annual reports, but also is used widely. And then what I did is I also explored the archives of Swiss tourism to look at the motifs that were mostly used by the photographers that were commissioned by Switzerland Tourism. And of course, a lot of them are about that idea of gazing at landscape. And of course, this references this earlier photochrome. And of course, here we have this idea of the David Caspar Friedrich, idea of kind of, looking out in wonder at the kind of sublime landscape. And here, this is kind of replicated. In a lot of the photographs, it was all about people stretching out their arms, kind of gazing at this wonder behind them. So, having identified the locations, I decided to go and make photographs in the most photographed places in Switzerland. And I wanted to find where these places were. And interestingly enough, many of them were actual platforms or had been specifically created for tourists to go and wonder at the landscape. So, of course, this is Gornergrat. And here we have... In summer, it's a kind of concrete area, but this is a gazing point for tourists. And I would stay for a good few hours kind of watching this performance of the tourist in the landscape. And the idea was to try and create these tableaus where the landscape becomes a backdrop within which tourists enact a particular notion of nationhood. And you know, and perform almost like actors on a stage. So these big landscapes were about kind of looking at this relationship between you know, people and this particular space. And then what I also wanted to do, which was it was to explore the detail. So often when I print photographs, they're quite large, and the idea is that when you're in the physical space looking at the photographs, you can actually really kind of go into the landscape and look at the details of what's happening. So I want it to be quite an immersive experience when you're looking at a photograph. What we actually did is in the book, I was able to take abstracts of each of the landscapes and actually kind of take you much closer into the actual landscape. So if we go through a couple more. And when Miss Jemima was talking about her experience, the discussion or the way that she talked would be about how this was an exhausting experience looking traveling through Switzerland. It would take days to reach somewhere like Rhine Falls or to reach the summit of you know, a mountain in Interlaken, and then that kind of really enabled the act of how they experienced the landscape. And now with the fact that cable cars, it's a very speedy experience. So what was interesting was when I was on these locations, I would often see a tour group come, and within 3 minutes they'd seen the site, they'd taken their photograph, they'd made the selfie, and then they'd got onto the bus and they were taken to the next location. So actually the experience of time is so different in terms of how we relate to the landscape. We carry on. Mm-hmm. So really, in terms of the exhibition, I wanted to kind of conflate these different ideas about the culture of instantaneity, that idea that we're all kind of photographing and recording imagery of a place and how that kind of experiences our act of looking. What I should say was that the way that the kind of theory behind what I was looking at was developed by a sociologist called Dean McCannell, who described this process of looking at landscape as site sacralization. And I'm actually going to kind of read... if you go back. Mm-hmm. So she describes site sacralization as a place is named, then framed and elevated before being enshrined, mechanically reproduced, and finally socially reproduced across a variety of media. So that idea is that a location is discovered and then it's photographed and then it's distributed. And so I wanted to kind of get a sense of that. So what I tried to do in the exhibition was augment the photographs. So each photograph had a barcode or was recognized by a media device so that you could actually look at additional information within each photograph. So some of them were small, short films that I made in each location, which kind of looked at what was taking place actually on these locations. And others were looking at the archives of Swiss tourism, but also photochromes, so that you could really kind of engage in a more, not just within the kind of experience of a 2D looking at a photograph, but you could explore a much kind of wider idea. But really, I kind of thought I'd leave my little section with a lovely quote by Miss Jemima, which I think is also quite interesting about how we think about tourism and actually that sense of kind of returning. And I just kind of loved her use of language. Thank you.
Nasty English tourists. Okay, so let's open the discussion. I think I want to start with you, Simon, because your work has for a long time been involved with notions of history, of identity, and also of how landscape is being used in many different ways. And for this project, you also kind of hacked the system of Switzerland tourism in a way. So if you can describe a little bit more in detail how this actually operates on a commercial, in a commercial way, let's say, in terms of how Switzerland tourism actually employs tourists to become promoters for Switzerland.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I discovered while I was doing the research and meeting with the social media teams in Swiss tourism was actually how advanced their technology now is to track tourists, and actually how a lot of their marketing is now actually using tourists to promote places themselves. So also, you know, the idea that we are now actually ourselves part of the process in elevating the status of a landscape or a place. So for instance, a lot of these locations, they would have placards that tell you, encourage you to upload a photograph using a particular hashtag. So they want you to upload a photograph using the hashtag #InLoveWithSwitzerland. And then, of course, they can search for that hashtag, and those photographs that you upload with that hashtag are automatically integrated into a website that Swiss Tourism have, which then shows your picture to the world. So actually, you're becoming part of that exercise in reproduction, if you like, of imagery.
And they can basically send you on Facebook, they can send you a specific personalized offer. Yeah. Don't you want to have to stay in this hotel tomorrow night? We have a special fare.
So they can now kind of track you. And what was interesting is that they have quite sophisticated software that tracks tweets. So what they'll do is that if ever they see a negative tweet about an experience somebody's having in Switzerland, one of their media team will be straight away tweeting that person in a live way to try and improve their disgruntled experience. So there's this idea that actually now as a tourist, we're monitored, if you like, in terms of our travel. But for me, it was most important was actually how they used the photograph, and actually, and now, you know, the way that advertising has changed completely from that idea of billboards or television ads, and now it's much more about that personalized feed that you might suddenly pop up on your Facebook page because you've searched at one point in the past Switzerland, and now that they can find that and they can promote to you directly. So and of course that's all based around the use of the photograph.
I find it interesting that you concentrated on the landscape, because that's, as you said, it was like the red line going through this relation between tourism and photography. And in Switzerland, you have all these beautiful sceneries. Would you have done a different kind of work if you had worked in, I don't know, in England or in France? Or how much is, we're talking about the identity, and we know landscapes play an important role, but how important do you feel is it really for the identity question? Is that a construction? Is it something going on in our minds, or is there something which is real?
No, I think there's definitely something real there. I mean, if I was to think about how do I feel as a British person, I would immediately think of a particular landscape, which would be either the coast or the Lake District, a place that where my mother was from and where we went on holiday. So my particular experiences of Britain are infused with a particular landscape, and I imagine that's completely the same in Switzerland, that people do have this sense of notion of a place. And of course, this is also very much built up within national literature, within music, within art, and then, you know, it's something that's kind of regurgitated. I think what's interesting about me making these photographs is that I doubt a Swiss photographer would necessarily have made these photographs, because to some extent, how can you get away with making yet another photograph of Gornergrat? You know, it's probably it is one of the most photographed places. But I think what I was able to do was actually utilize that fact, and that it gave me a kind of carte blanche to make this point. I read the other day about this. I think it's a French photographer that developed this system, developed this camera that will not let you take a photograph in any place that has already been photographed. So what it does is it has a GPS system, and it tracks images on the internet. So if you're stood looking at the Eiffel Tower and somebody else has taken a photograph in that spot, the camera will not work. So you have to keep moving until it gets to the position where you can. And so this was explained to me. I think actually there's somebody here told me about it. But I think that's kind of that interesting point about actually when you physically discover how many photographs have been taken in an actual geographical location. But going back to your point about landscape, I think the way that I photographed this would be different if I had been Swiss myself. And I think that's one of the interesting things about being invited as an outsider to come into a place. And I think that's where what was interesting about all the other photographers, and particularly Alinka's work, is that sense of how a different kind of heritage and back down experience has kind of formed what she was looking for.
I think one of the problems when you do this kind of work about identity in photography is you always have your projections. You come with certain ideas. Also, when you come with your project, you have certain ideas in your mind. So you're looking for something which you know already. I think that's the big challenge in this with all these projects, to sort of avoid that you get into the same ideas which you bring along. Maybe you can express yourself about this. How did you work on this border between projections and what you find?
Were you going to say something?
No.
Continue in English?
Yes.
I think what I was looking for was something authentic. I was looking for what I really saw, and I photographed a lot of people of mixed heritage, so second generation, which in Switzerland are called segundos. So much so, apparently, that some journalists in Switzerland thought the project was about immigration. And I found that very interesting because I am Mexican, but I grew up in England, so I'm also an immigrant of I've experienced that otherness or that outsider from a personal perspective. So I wasn't particularly looking for it, but I certainly, I was certainly interested in speaking to people who had become Swiss. So I think nationality becomes a little bit more poignant when you have to become something. And I've done projects about becoming. I did a project about becoming South Sudanese when South Sudan became independent. I did a project about the Cuban Revolution where the whole national identity suddenly changed and became centered around this revolutionary ideal. So I was kind of looking for that kind of center point in the Swissness and what united all these people. And what I found was I was actually surprised by the differences between the regions. So it's very interesting that in Switzerland 4 languages are mother tongue, recognized mother tongue. So there was all these interesting contradictions and all this kind of plurality and also separation. So it wasn't my intention, but I was kind of consciously looking for, I didn't want to come with an idea.
Justement, en parlant d'immigration, ça serait peut-être intéressant que tu commentes la photographie que nous avons choisie pour l'affiche.
Ah oui, d'accord.
Puisque cette photographie, qui est une magnifique photographie en elle-même, a une histoire particulière. Et ça serait peut-être intéressant que tu l'expliques au public.
Oui, l'image que c'est sur l'affiche, c'est une fille qui s'appelle Ala. Ala était migrante de Yémen. Sa famille a quitté le Yémen quand elle avait 8 mois. Et il a vraiment agrandi en Suisse. Mais c'est difficile pour elle parce que sa famille est très musulmane et le lieu où elle habite, c'est pas du tout un lieu où il y a beaucoup une grande communauté musulmane. Et cette image, ça parle un peu de cette landscape, le paysage, la iconographie suisse de lacs, de montagnes, mais aussi c'est le springboard, le plongeur. Cette semaine que je l'ai rencontrée à VV, elle est devenue adulte. Elle a eu son anniversaire de 18 ans. Elle était en train de faire tout type de bureaucratie nécessaire pour devenir adulte en Suisse. Et c'est l'idée de plonger à l'adultesse. Je ne sais pas si cette parole existe en France, mais de devenir adulte et devenir adulte suisse. Pour moi, c'est très intéressant parce que moi, je suis mexicaine et j'habitais vraiment entre l'Angleterre et mexicaine et je me sens 100% mexicaine. Mais pour elle, elle n'a jamais été à Yémen. Elle n'a pas une mémoire vraiment de ce pays. Elle a vécu qu'en Suisse et parler d'identité nationale avec elle, c'était très particulier. Et il y a des autres aussi qu'elles sont secondos. Chez eux, ils parlent peut-être en italien, en grec. À l'école, c'est tout en allemand. Et cette dualité, c'est très intéressant pour moi. Au niveau culturel, de langage, de toute manière de différence, c'est intéressant. Mais la photographie a beaucoup de limitations et on ne peut pas voir toute l'histoire chaque fois. Mais c'est important de dire aussi que pour faire chaque image, j'ai eu beaucoup de conversations avec chaque participant pour vraiment comprendre la personnalité de chaque personne et un lieu, par exemple, important pour chaque personne.
I mean, I think going back to your point about stereotypes, I mean, I think every stereotype is based in some truth. So I think it would be wrong to ignore stereotypes. And I think often we're too politically correct to think that we can't look at stereotypes. It's basically, but it's more about how you do deal with it and how the kind of overall presentation, you know, kind of deals with it. So to some extent, each of our projects was just a little jigsaw piece in a bigger kind of dialogue. And we're just adding another layer of meaning and another interpretation. And I think that's what's interesting about what each of us has done is it all together they work better than they do individually, if you like, because it gives you a wider perspective. I mean, I think in terms of my own work, to some extent, it's not necessarily about Switzerland. It's about globalization. It's about the use of. I mean, I could have done this project probably anywhere. I could have done it in Paris. In France. You know, it just so happens that it is the Swiss landscape that runs through all the pictures.
And I think this is something that would be my next question, or the kind of topic we can talk about further, is this notion of we had the great transformation, we went into a kind of mass industrial society, and we went into globalization, and now we're experiencing a kind of maybe a great regression. It has been termed by different people. Also in terms of how this globalization paradoxically leads to strong movements of renationalization of the whole discourse. And this was, of course, also the context in Switzerland. In contemporary Switzerland, we also have this discourse, not only in Switzerland, of course, but I mean, you are having your own issues in the UK with the Brexit vote. And oh, sorry, I wasn't supposed to mention Brexit, but yeah, I think that's kind of interesting because you have been working for almost a decade on British identity and how that relates to landscape. So I would be interested in how much did you follow the discussions within Switzerland? Was that any factor on your decision? Or on the type of work that you did? Or?
No, not really. I mean, I think, as Alinka has already said, what struck me most was the regionality of Switzerland and actually how it felt like it was a number of different entities. You know, the Italian part felt so much different to the German part and to the French part. You know, so there was, I think, for me, it was quite striking in terms of that change in. Maybe not identity, but just experience of each place. There was something different about it, whether that was cultural or whether that was the food or whatever. They just had this kind of different sense of place. I mean, I think in terms of my photographs, when you drill down into them and you look at who is on these landscapes, who's using this, you really get a sense of movement of people in the world. I mean, you know, the number of Indians that come to Switzerland now is incredible. I mean, apparently there's a whole Bollywood movement where, because a lot of Bollywood films have a Swiss dance sequence, a lot of Indians will now come to witness the place where these films are made. You know, so I think Glacier 3000 is one of the most popular places for Bollywood films to have a sequence made. And just in looking at the mobility now of Chinese tourism, it's quite extraordinary, the number of, just the vast numbers that would be coming through. And actually, when you go to a lot of these sites now, I mean, I think it was the number of expensive jewelry shops at 4,000 meters that are all Chinese staff, you know, and it's kind of very interesting looking at who's using these places and who is it.
So these locations are places of focalization, also of trading stereotypes in a way, right?
Il y a juste une question dans la salle. Private bank.
You mean generally across all 5 series that we should have looked at the idea of Switzerland as a banking? Yeah. Haven't they been trying to address that recently? I thought Switzerland was cleaning itself up.
I think it's as of next month.
As of next month, yeah. I mean, I think, there's so many different stories that each of us could tell. I mean, you know, we've chosen our own kind of theme to follow. And I think with something like this, you can't tick every box. It becomes a shopping list of photographs. I think you have to take quite a strong position with each of your projects and do that well, rather than an exhibition like this trying to be all things to all people. So volume 2 will include Swiss banks. We need a good bank to invest in it.
And I think this is actually what you are pointing to, Simon, is actually an interesting point also about artist commissions and projects that, I mean, this project took almost 2.25 years to realize altogether, from first idea to realization. And for you, Alinka, it was also like a challenge when we discussed the way that you were going to create the project. It was clear that there were limitations on what was possible, and also that it's not the FSA. You can't work for multiple years and seasons on a topic, and so it's also this question of how you actually found your subjects. You didn't want to make that definitive statement about Swiss youth. It was more this kind of friends of friends principle, right?
Yeah, the idea was to make it very organic and natural, and how I would get to know the country. So it could be through people that I met along the way, and it could be through personal encounters. And what I found about Switzerland, I've worked in very challenging environments around the world, and Switzerland was probably the easiest. The teenagers are very, very, very welcoming. So I met one girl in a cafe, and then the next week I got a call, and she invited me to spend a week with her and her friends in a chalet. So that was, just very generous. I found them very, very generous, which made my job a lot easier. And I also had a lot of fun, because I'm 36, so it was fun to go back to being a teenager. Because I really spent my days with them and evenings with them. The other thing is that because all my projects take on a very different style, I guess what brings every single project of mine together is the interrogation of the medium, of the photographic medium itself. So each time for me is a challenge of not only what am I going to point my camera at, but how am I going to do it? how am I going to use the medium, what style. So I definitely had August Sander in mind, of his great body of work about the German population, but obviously I wanted to bring in a more contemporary charged aesthetic. And then I wanted to kind of counterbalance it with maps or some kind of backdrop. If I'd continued, I would have definitely gone into this idea of language, because I found that, visual communication, thinking about visual communication was very important, but also entering each context through the native language of each region was absolutely crucial for me. It definitely made a difference. Yeah.
Et justement, tu avais un temps assez limité pour ce projet. Oui. Et comme on est en train de préparer le tome 2 avec les banques, et tu disais que tu voulais continuer ce travail. Oui. Et que justement, c'est ça qui est intéressant dans la commande, c'est qu'il y a un temps très précis avec une deadline, une exposition, un livre. Mais là, tu disais que tu voulais continuer ce travail. Qu'est-ce que ça sera alors ?
Oui, je ne sais pas si je peux continuer, mais l'idée, le rêve, c'est de rencontrer les gens chaque année. Par exemple, voir comment les gens, qu'est-ce que c'est à grandir en Suisse, et toute la relation de la temporalité. Et aussi, j'aimerais bien faire quelque chose sur la langue, parce que ça, je trouve que c'est très important. J'aime beaucoup l'idée de la langue comme mode d'expression, et je trouve que c'est la chose intéressante pour moi, c'est que le jeune Suisse dans la région française, le média, la télévision, les nouvelles, c'est tout le médium français en fait. Et le côté de Ticino, de l'italien, le média, c'est le médium italien, la télévision italienne. Et ça, je trouvais très intéressant qu'il y a plus, ils sont très liés à le pays à côté. Et je trouvais ça au niveau culturel aussi. Pardon?
I think the curators should answer a question now. I mean, this kind of serious point. This is 5 individuals making 5 different pieces of work, and it's the curator's job to try and to bring those 5 different views into actually an exhibition that makes sense. So, how did you do it?
Effectivement, je pense que monter une exposition, c'est comme aussi avoir des artistes en résidence. C'est pas uniquement de choisir 5 bons photographes, mais c'est vraiment le mélange et la cohérence qui fait sens. Et c'est vrai que pour nous, c'était très important, comme cela a été mentionné, de ne pas uniquement s'attarder sur un regard, mais d'avoir ces 5 regards qui sont forcément des regards subjectifs, qui sont cohérents.
Yes, I would like to add something. Compared to previous projects like the one we saw, Theo Frey or others, recent projects which tried to give an objective image of Switzerland. This project was never intended to give the truth or the real whole panorama of Switzerland. And I think there was a reason why we didn't do that, because some things you just cannot express in photographs. Like you have a lot of information about Switzerland, you have a lot of information about banks, but would it be interesting to see the same information in images? I'm not sure. It could have been, but it's not. It was never the intention to make a list of what is Switzerland, and you have all the topics, and then you go there and photograph them. This kind of book exists also, and it's always a bit the same. So the challenge was to find the very small or thin line between representations we know and also some new aspects. And I think the interesting part of, if we compare your works, there's always some kind of contradiction. You have the the landscape, but then you have people looking at the landscape, which is sort of a bit strange, and the people come from somewhere else. You have the youth, the young people, which do not really represent an identity, I think, because that's the point. You're trying to find this identity, but in the end you have to say it's a globalized world. It's not, you cannot represent Switzerland as Switzerland, and that's it. It's like, as you said, and as Simon said, we're getting closer to each other. It could have been anywhere, maybe. I'm not sure. I mean,
for
that's
me personally, I found the experience of the access and the process very particular in Switzerland. Actually, I found a lot of I think the contradictions that people. What I found really interesting was that the things that we think are amazing about growing up in Switzerland, when you experience them firsthand, could be a burden. For example, the opportunity. You know, they can. It's a very wealthy country, but this opportunity that they have, a lot of the young people I spoke to internalized it as a burden, a real burden of having to choose your career, having to fulfill, very demanding academically, perhaps quite similar to France. But it's, I thought it was I thought the regional separation, so an anecdote quickly, on the National Day, which was the 1st of August, I was in Ticino, and I asked around where was the most important place in the country to witness the National Day. And everyone said Brunnen, or the place that you can't get to, Rütli. And so I had a train pass, and I saw the train, and it was like 3 hours away. And I'm from Mexico City, so I can travel 3 hours to go and meet someone quite easily. So I crossed the country in a day to go spend the day there, and then came back to Ticino. And for so many people in Ticino, they call anything outside Ticino Svizzera interna, which to me was like internal Switzerland, and it's like going on an adventure to Switzerland, Svizzera interna. And for me, that kind of proximity but distance, that contradiction of so near yet so distant, culturally and in identity, is very particular to Switzerland, I feel, or maybe compared to Mexico. You know.
Yeah, and I think also on another level, from the curatorial side, one could say that one of the approaches was also to try and present photography in a way that relates the digital and the physical space, and that pops up in almost all of the projects. Maybe the least with Shane, but even Shane uses this interchange that you see here between wallpapers that are almost screen-like in their presentational form of the image, and the framed work with the contact sheets. That's something that was quite important to us when we started out discussing the projects, that it was also a reflection about contemporary photography and different strategies of finding images and finding authorship and questioning authorship, like you did with your Snapchat project. But I think we open up for questions now. As a last remark, it's also nice to know that there is sometimes a second life. So this little book by Shane is also going to be a much bigger book next year, with many more images. It's going to be published by Patrick Frey Editions in Zurich. So that's coming out in spring. And we are happy to answer some questions if there are any. And otherwise, thank you for coming. No more questions? Okay. Well, thank you and have a good evening.